In this video, we're going to talk about how to get organized and write a great paper. Let's get started. So, first thing I would like to recommend, if you haven't already done it, is to go back and watch my video on how to take notes on articles. This process will simplify your writing so much, and it will make it so much easier. I really hope you'll try the techniques that I've described in that video. All right, now that you've done that, let's start writing. The first thing I like to do is to make a very bare bones outline. And by bare bones, I mean this would be your outline for any paper. It doesn't matter what the topic is. You say, okay, I'm going to need an introduction paragraph. I'm going to need something here in the body. I'm going to need a conclusion paragraph. And I'm going to need my page of references. All right, so now I at least know what I have to populate. Maybe I take a break, maybe tomorrow I come back, and now my next step in my outline is to start filling in that body. It's much easier to write your body first and your introduction later because you don't really know what the body's going to contain until you write the body. So I like to put the body in first. So here I'm going to refer to those notes that I took, organize them into some kind of like clusters or some kinds of relationships that'll allow me to organize my body in a coherent way. And so maybe I've decided that this first study that I'm going to talk about, it just sort of adds to the knowledge. And so there's no point in really describing its details. I just want to say what they found. So maybe I'm just going to introduce one sentence that tells that there was a study that found this. Then maybe I'm going to move on to study 2, where there is something interesting to talk about in the design. Maybe they used an unusual subject sample. Maybe they were much older than college students or much younger than college students. Maybe they were a specific demographic subset. Maybe maybe the difference or the interesting part is in the actual design. Did they do an online survey or an experiment in a lab? Or an observation at a mall or something, something about it that makes the design worthwhile to describe. I'm going to go into a little detail here on study 2 to describe this unusual thing and then give the main findings. Study 3, maybe it's another one where it's got a good outcome that is consistent with other things. So I just provide the main findings. And then maybe in study 4, sorry, I'm out of order on my animation. On study 4, maybe again, I have something interesting I want to say about study 4 and I give more of that description of the design. Notice I still say I'm going to give a brief design description. I'm not going to go in a ton of detail because you only have 3 pages to fill. So I'm going to give details that are enough to illustrate why study 4 is important, but not so much detail that I'm writing 7 pages instead of the assigned 3. And then finally, maybe I'm going to wrap up with study 5 that concludes with, again, a main finding that characterizes the other ones or something. Like I said, there are a lot of different ways that you can organize the body. So please don't be constrained by me giving this structure. I'm just trying to give you ideas. All right, so now that we have filled out our body, we're going to come back maybe another day when we're feeling energetic again, and we're going to focus on the conclusion. I tend to do my conclusion before I do my introduction. In the conclusion, I'm going to restate what the main topic is, and I'm going to summarize the studies that I just talked about, but now in a conclusion type of way, where I say, obviously this topic that I'm talking about is showing some consistency across studies as illustrated by the ones that I've introduced, and I cite them again. Or there's some contradiction in the research. Some find this and some find that. And I put citations for those who found this, and I give citations for those who found that. Whatever it is, I'm going to try to sort of encapsulate the main findings of these studies in sort of one sentence, really. Your conclusion paragraph will probably be 2 sentences. One that states the main topic in a different way than you're going to do in the intro. And then probably 1 sentence, maybe 2, where you're summarizing the studies. The last thing I usually write is the introduction, where now I'm going to present the topic statement very clearly. What is this paper about? and then give a brief summary of the main findings of most studies, and of course, always include those citations. So let me give you an example of a paper that I think a lot of times these ideas make more sense when I break it down in a real example. So here we have a paper that is titled, "Is Verbal Labeling of Pictures Automatic?" Okay, so do you automatically label pictures with words is another way, I guess, of saying it. So notice the topic sentence. The dual coding hypothesis contends that material can be coded verbally, imaginally, or both. Clear topic statement with a citation. The next two sentences are, a brief summary of the main findings of most studies. When both the verbal and the pictorial code are available, blah, 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 Pavio and Sapo, 1969. New sentence, most studies have found, blah, blah, blah. And now we have a string of 3 articles that all found that same thing. And so I wanted to direct your attention to how to do that. This will probably be something that you might do in your introduction paragraph. So I want you to see the structure. So this author wrote E.G before the list, and that's to acknowledge that there are probably other studies out there that would fit into this list, but I'm not citing them. So that's what the E.G means. It means, for example, so here's a sample list of 3 articles that have found this basic finding. Now, the first one is a citation that has 2 authors, and so you'll see that it's got both authors' names listed. The second and the third citations, they have 3 or more authors, and so you see that they're truncated to the first author's name et al. Dot. So that's the proper structure when you have 3 or more authors. Always when there's 2 authors, you list both. Always when there's 3 or more authors, you list the first author et al. So in the first part of the sentence, it says most studies have found that recall declines when you don't verbally label the words. And then the second clause of that sentence says, but some have found superior memory for pictures even without verbal labels. And so you see the one citation that is an example of that kind of finding. So that's the introductory paragraph, right? Kind of tells you in one sentence what the topic is going to be. And then in 2 sentences shows you all of the studies that we're going to be talking about in this whole paper. And then we go to paragraph 2 where the body begins. So you see that we've got Nelson, and apparently Nelson does a lot of research on this topic because he's cited a whole bunch of times here. But you start to, in this case, describe why or what happened in these studies, right? Like that's the next step in the body, is to actually describe the conclusions of individual studies with a little bit of detail. Something I'd like to attract your attention to on the second paragraph is that there is a long string of citations of the same author with other authors, right? So you've got Nelson by himself, you've got Nelson and others from 1977, Nelson and others from 1976. They're organized alphabetically, and when you look at the reference list, you'll see that these 2 are organized alphabetically based on the second author's name, and that's why they're in this position in this list. But what you're seeing is a whole bunch of citations of the same basic structure. And then this author goes on to start talking about just the Nelson et al. 1977 study. Here we have them being introduced here. Down here, it's still Nelson et al. 1977. And so the author just made it really clear that they, Nelson et al., have gone on to say. So you don't keep reciting Nelson et al. 1977. You say it once, and then you make it really clear through your transitional statements that you're still talking about Nelson et al. 1977. So even if you don't have a list of the same author like this case does, Nelson 1979, 77, 76, and so on, even if it's different authors, I oftentimes see students say the same author repeatedly, and don't do that. That's not how you cite. That's called oversighting. You want to instead do it once, and then for the rest of the time that you're still talking about evidence from that source, you make it really clear, I'm still talking about evidence from that source. All right, so I thought I'd share with you the APA Style Guide 7th edition, 6 steps to proper citation. And you'll notice that the first thing that they list is that you need to read the work that you're going to cite. I often get questions from students, should I cite the sources that the article that I'm reading are actually cited? It's kind of a confusing nested concept. So I read this article by Nelson, and Nelson cited Pavio. Do I cite Pavio or do I cite Nelson? You cite Nelson because that's what you read. You read Nelson. You only cite the work that you have read. And if you plan on citing something, you need to have actually read it. In my video on how to take notes from an article, I kind of cover points 2 and 3, which is to, as you're reading the article, notice something that you think is worthwhile and write it down. As you're going, I really recommend that you populate your reference list. Go ahead and start filling that in. And then the next step that they list, number 5, is to put your in-text citation as you're writing. So I thought I would share with you different ways to go about structuring your citations. APA recommends that you kind of mix it up a little bit because it makes the reading a little bit easier if it's not really super redundant, always having your citations at the end of the sentence or always having them at the beginning, things like that. So let's pretend like you're planning on citing McDaniel and Masson, 1977. I gave you the full reference there in the top right. How would you cite it? Well, there are several options available. One is to start the sentence with the citation. And so in this case, you cannot start a sentence with a parentheses. So you have to put the authors outside of the parentheses if it's going to be the first thing in the sentence. So in this case, it's starting the sentence, McDaniel and Masson, parentheses, 1977, suggest blah, blah, blah. So that's one way that you can cite something. Another way to do it is to put it in the middle of the sentence. Maybe I've already cited another source and I say a bunch of stuff and I say, and that's consistent with what McDaniel and Masson 1977 suggest. So again, you'll notice in that case, the names are on the outside of the parentheses and the date is inside the parentheses. Maybe you want to put it at the end of the sentence. So blah, blah, this is consistent with previous research, put McDaniel and Masson 1977 in the parentheses, the whole thing. Notice that when you have two authors and their names are outside of the parentheses, you separate them with the word and when you have two authors and their names are inside the parentheses, you separate their names with the symbol that's called an ampersand. So that's an important thing that APA sticks in there for just fun, to make it more difficult. But and when it's on the outside of a parentheses, ampersand when it's in the parentheses. And then the final example I wanted to give you is if you wanted to cite McDaniel and Masson in a list of citations that are within parentheses, always alphabetize the citations in the list. So Craik comes before McDaniel, and you separate those citations with a semicolon. So those are the rules that are hard and fast. Some of those are rules. And then of course you have the freedom to decide, do I want to start the sentence with the citation? Do I want to end the sentence with the citation? Do I want to put it in the middle of the sentence? Whatever makes sense and flows the best for you is what you want to be doing. There are lots of different ways to do it. As long as you adhere to these basic rules about, inside the parentheses or out, ands versus ampersands, truncating 3 or more authors to first author et al., you're going to do fine. So you get a little bit of freedom, but not a ton of freedom because there's all those rules. All right, well, hopefully this clears up some things and also hopefully gets you motivated to try to use an outline to keep yourself on track and help yourself to write a paper that really flows. All right, well, have fun writing.